On this episode of Death Row Stories, 6 people, 3 of them children, are gunned down in an Ohio apartment.
He pulled a 9mm handgun and shot everybody in the room.
But after an eyewitness fingers a suspect,
he said, "That man right there, that's the man who shot me."
questions are raised about his death sentence.
It is extremely important, if you're going to kill someone, to kill the right person.
And a race to spare his life begins.
I had to tell them, pardon him or kill him.
There's a body in the water.
He was butchered and murdered.
Many people proclaim their innocence.
In this case, there are a number of things that stink.
This man is remorseless.
He needs to pay for it with his life.
The electric chair flashed in front of my eyes.
Get a conviction at all costs. Let the truth fall where it may.
It was about 10:30 on Sunday night. Phone rang at home, picked it up, and it was the assistant city editor. And he said to me, "Get dressed, you're going to Bucyrus. There's been a shooting."
On February 13th, 1994, 23-year-old Rick Warren stumbled into a restaurant in rural Ohio with 4 gunshot wounds.
But Rick was able to push past the gunman and run to a restaurant just a few hundred feet away, all the while leaving a trail of blood in his path.
Richard Warren said that he had been shot at the Bucyrus Estates apartments next door. I approached the crime scene. I could just see the door. I think there was a broken window, people coming and going, and a whole lot of tight-lipped law enforcement officers.
Inside, Richard's 24-year-old girlfriend, Marshall Chapman, and her aunt were shot dead. Marshall's 4-year-old daughter and 2 young cousins were clinging to life.
A neighbor there saw a man run from the scene, saw him jump into the getaway car, hit the snowbank, and then leave. She described the man that she saw outside as a large black man. The police took a cast from the snowbank of the license plate and then also imprints in the snow from the tires on the car.
At the hospital, the 3 child victims fought for their lives. 7-year-old Juanita and her 4-year-old brother Quentin would survive the night. 4-year-old Marche was not as lucky.
Marche, she was so cute. Marshall was not just my cousin, she was my best friend. We just were so close. My Aunt Linda, too. She was a great person. She loved her family. And if you ever bury 3 people in your family at one time, and one is a 4-year-old baby, it's life-altering.
Searching for leads, investigators got a tip that Marshall's brother, Rudell Chapman, had recently snitched against a group of local drug dealers.
It was Rudell Chapman's family members that got killed, and therefore the killer must have been either looking for Rudell or looking to take it out on him by attacking his family.
Richard Warren, who escaped after being shot in the jaw and 3 times in the back, survived surgery. At 5 a.m. the next morning, he began to communicate.
Warren had told a nurse at the hospital that the shooter was named Kevin, and at that point, the nurse contacted police.
Police created a list of suspected drug dealers in the area named Kevin, and Richard picked out 30-year-old Kevin Keith, who'd been arrested in a recent local drug raid.
Investigators visited Richard Warren in the hospital and showed him a photo lineup. Richard Warren identified Kevin Keith as the person who had opened fire on the people in that room.
Richard also gave a videotaped account of the shooting.
Richard Warren told investigators that a man came to the door, a large black man. Apparently, the adults knew the man, spoke with him for a bit.
When I asked Marshall who was that, she said, Kevin something, he's involved in a drug bust, a big drug bust.
He asked for a glass of water. When he finished the water, he pulled a 9mm handgun from the green garbage bag.
I made you lay down. And he made Marshall lay down, and Linda lay down. And all three kids, he made them lay down too.
He ordered everybody on the floor and then shot everybody in the room. It's hard for me to talk about them because my heart breaks for them. It's just awful.
48 hours after the shooting, on February 15th, 1994, a SWAT team was dispatched to bring in Kevin Keith.
30-year-old Kevin Keith sits in the Crawford County Jail charged with the murders of the Chapman family, people he says he has known for a long time.
We all grew up in Crawford County. Our families have been knowing each other for years.
After they had arrested Kevin Keith, that was actually the first time any of us had seen him. Big, large, imposing man, mild-mannered though. He was emphatic that he was not the shooter.
I just can't understand what's going on. That they would even pick me up for something like this, especially because those kids, I spent a lot of time with the two Reeves kids.
He seemed convincing, but again, the cliche is prisons are full of innocent men. So you would expect him to be.
Kevin Keith's trial began 3 months later, on May 10th, 1994. He faced 6 counts of aggravated and attempted murder.
This was murder, and a particularly heinous murder on top of that. I think the worst part about that was the children that were involved. That was the hardest part.
They considered fingerprints, they considered glass samples, fiber samples, and yet not one piece of evidence was retrieved that would point to Kevin Keith.
State forensic scientist Michelle Yezzo disagreed, testifying that a partial 043 license plate print in the snow placed Kevin Keith at the scene.
The prosecution was telling us it wasn't the full print, but it was enough of it to tie it to a car that Kevin Keith was known to drive.
The prosecution's key witness, Richard Warren, also confirmed the motive for the shooting.
He put the gun to her head and told her to shut up. And then I said, well, you should have thought about this before your brother started ratting on people. And then what happened? Then he put the gun to her head again, and that's when it went off.
This man was shot 4 times with a 9mm and survived. And the prosecutor asked, can you identify the man who shot you? And he said, that man right there, and he pointed to Kevin Keith. To me, that was all I think all I really needed to hear. And that little girl.
He made you get down where?
On the floor.
On the floor? Okay.
Shot
He made everybody get down?
Yep.
That was the final piece, I think, for all of us.
After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury would decide Kevin Keith's fate.
We took our time over the 2-day period to make sure that we reviewed everything. And in the end, it was one and done. Guilty. Now for us to sit there and decide that Kevin Keith must die for his crime. That was the hard part. All 12 of us were convinced was guilty. And the death penalty was what seemed like the appropriate punishment.
Given the manner in which the crime was carried out, the motive for the crime, and the lack of any explanation or excuse, I think the jury made the right decision.
The 30-year-old Crestline man still says he's innocent.
You find it kind of strange that the police haven't questioned me at all about this?
What do you think about it?
I think it's a frame.
In May 1994, Kevin Keith was sentenced to death for murdering 3 members of the Chapman family and shooting 3 others.
When I got to death row, I felt hopeless. I thought about the Reeves, I thought about the Chapmans, I thought about my family. I thought about Crestline, because now you have a lot of people who grew up together, not speaking, and it ain't that family atmosphere. no more.
Kevin Keith grew up 10 miles from the scene of the shooting in Crestline, Ohio. The few African-American families that lived there were close-knit and connected by marriage.
Crestline to me was like Mayberry, Andy Griffith's show, except for it had black people in it. Back then, I had pretty much a relative on every corner. My fondest memories as a child are in Crestline.
At age 10, Kevin moved to the larger city of Canton, Ohio.
I became a football player. We were state champs. But there was a guy that sold weed right across the street. Back then, it was like no big deal. I got into harder stuff later on because crack had entered the scene.
At the age of 24, Kevin served 10 months for stealing a purse in order to buy crack. Soon after, he served 2 years for dealing. When he got out, Kevin returned home to Crestline.
I was like, okay, good, Crestline, it's kind of slow, but that's what I need. But then I kind of ran into somebody who was kind of looking for something, so I went and got it. And so from there, I just started selling cocaine, crack.
In January 1994, Kevin was arrested in the Crestline drug raid and released on bail. 3 weeks later, he was brought in for the shootings.
When I heard the door crash in and it was coming around the house, the first thing went to my mind was, I haven't sold drugs since the raid. I was kind of shocked.
You have me to say who you think did all this?
I wouldn't have any idea who would do something like this, especially in this area. I don't know anybody like that around here that would hurt those kids.
I was really having a tough time with it because, first of all, it wasn't true. And so I was like, somebody is going to come up from that police department and say, well, let's take another look at this. But it never happened. To this day, they haven't asked me one question. To this day.
I saw him on TV that he had been arrested for shooting 6 people. I thought, this can't be true. And I knew that he had some things that he was doing that were wrong. Even still, I know there are people who are just horrible people. Kevin's not one of them.
When the news came out, I'm not gonna lie, I was like, no way. No way. Couldn't have been him. He was a funny guy, and a nice guy. Yeah, I thought. He chose to take that gun in there and shoot those people. I know he did it.
In a death penalty case, it is extremely important, if you're going to kill someone, to kill the right person. So you want to be certain that the evidence is sufficient to do it.
Veteran public defender Harry Reinhart took on Kevin's appeals.
The law enforcement officers involved in this case, what they did right was they arrived on the scene quickly. They did collect some evidence, and they did interview witnesses. What they did not do that was right was they discussed evidence in the case prior to trial.
Some clothing yesterday and some fiber, which we hope we'll be able to tie into the scene, and we've lifted some fingerprints. Now, I don't want to say that we've made an arrest and now we're going to make the case, but I mean, we still are still very interested in putting a lot of this evidence together.
Chief of police said, now it's not that we've arrested a suspect and are trying to build a case afterward. Of course, that's exactly what he was trying to do, and in fact, what he did.
Harry felt press coverage also might have influenced an eyewitness who saw the gunman flee the scene.
Nancy Smathers, on the night of the offense, could describe him as a large black man, but you couldn't see any facial features. Subsequently, Nancy Smathers was watching television and saw Kevin Keith on the news. She called law enforcement and said, hey, that's the guy, I recognize him now. That's a contaminated identification.
Do you see the individual in the courtroom who you saw at the car that night?
Yes.
Would you point to this person, and if you
He's
can?
sitting beside Mr. Banks.
This woman was allowed to testify, which is the amazing part of the thing, and the jury apparently believed her testimony.
Survivor Richard Warren also identified Kevin in court, but Harry would soon uncover evidence calling that ID into question.
It is alleged that he came up with the first name Kevin, but his testimony related to that is simply bizarre and incredible.
As he prepared Kevin Keith's death row appeals, attorney Harry Reinhardt questioned how eyewitness Richard Warren had managed to identify Kevin from his hospital bed.
As he's coming out of surgery at 5 in the morning, he can't even speak yet. He's giving John Ford, his nurse, the name. That's how the name Kevin got injected into this case.
Nurse 4, who was called to testify, stated that after surgery, while Warren was recovering with a tube down his throat, he wrote on a piece of paper the first name Kevin, which 4 then communicated to the law enforcement officers investigating this case.
What did he write?
Specifically in relation to the incident, he said that he felt that the first name of the person was Kevin, but that was all he knew.
While 4 claimed Richard had written down Kevin's name, that note was never admitted as evidence.
And the testimony was that 4 had not retained the note. We're talking about the identification of the perpetrator in this case. Why was it treated so cavalierly?
Police had also used an unorthodox method of helping Richard Warren identify the gunman's last name.
Captain John Stanley testified that he called Richard Warren at the hospital and then said, "So I hear you said the name is Kevin. How about one of these last 4 names?" A name lineup, which I'd never heard of prior to this case and I've never heard of since. John Stanley testified that Warren said that he was 75% sure that Keith was the name, but the call was not recorded if it actually happened. We needed to be able to issue subpoenas and to depose people, and the court wouldn't let us do that. We simply got nowhere.
As Harry fought his way through the appeals process, Kevin Keith struggled with life on death row.
You would think a guy, since you're innocent, that you would have this fight. But I had no hope or faith in the system. I really thought I was going to be executed, just simple as that.
In 2004, Kevin got a letter from a high school friend and invited her to visit.
The first thing he said to me was not hello, it was, now I'm going to be here in 5 years, or I'm going to be dead in 5 years. If you're going to stand by me through this, then you can have a seat. But if you think that you can't handle it, I have nothing but love for you, but you can leave. And honestly, I wanted to leave, but I believed in his innocence, so I sat down.
It was unbelievable. It really was. She opened me up to the world, and I started looking at life a little differently. There was a light of hope there.
Kevin had been on death row for 10 years when Harry caught a break in his case. A public records request uncovered the note that Nurse 4 swore he did not save.
The existence of the note proves that 4's testimony at trial was incorrect, untrue, perhaps intentionally. The note was supposed to have been written by Richard Warren. The name Kevin is in block letters, and the rest just look like scribbles. What do you make of that? Did Richard Warren actually write this, or was this document created after the fact to kind of justify things?
Harry and his team filed new petitions with the courts, but by 2007, they were all denied.
We fought the good fight, but we were unsuccessful. I was discouraged and frustrated, but sadly not surprised.
Kevin's execution date could come at any time. Rachel Troutman now became his public defender.
I was only 3 years out of law school when I first got on Kevin's case. I was 30 years old, and I had done a couple other cases, but I had not been on a case that was quite this extensive. So I met with Kevin, and he told me, that he was innocent. Even though I was not that long out of law school, I was not naive enough to just believe that right off the bat. But I said, if you are innocent, then there will be something out there that'll show that.
While Rachel searched for ways to save Kevin's life, 2 of the surviving victims looked forward to his execution.
I don't care about what nobody else feels because they wasn't there. I was. I knew the guy. We knew who he was.
Kevin Keith did it. Period.
In all, 3 adults and 3 children were shot in this incident. Now, 2 youngsters and an adult were then life-flighted to Columbus hospitals.
Juanita and Quentin Reeves were 7 and 4 years old when their family was murdered.
We were, in the hospital, 3 months? Therapy, counseling, afterwards. I still got to deal with anxiety, depression, and everything else, but you still get through your daily life, you know what I mean? You still got joy. So it doesn't make you nothing but stronger.
Changed who I was. Might have happened 25 years ago, but I still feel the pain every day.
Marshall and Marche were my cousins. And Linda was my aunt. They don't get to be here and speak up and tell who killed them. This today is for them.
We know the truth. I know the truth. I was right there. She was right beside me.
We're witnesses. Kevin Keith killed my family. Kevin Keith shot me. Kevin Keith shot my brother. Kevin Keith shot Rick Warren. How can he not confess and say I did it? What person shoots little kids? When I am investigating a case, the loss of life and the victims in the case are not an afterthought. This is 6 people who were shot, and they deserve to have a full investigation, not a haphazard one.
In 2007, Kevin Keith's new attorney, Rachel Troutman, began her own investigation into the case, including Richard Warren's identification of Kevin.
I was suspicious of how the police had gotten Warren to ultimately identify Kevin. It didn't seem right. So I hired an eyewitness identification expert.
I'm a cognitive psychologist. I study memory, especially, and I've done a lot of research on eyewitness identification issues. In the Kevin Keith case, it's essential to look at the memory evidence because it's one of the primary pieces of evidence against him. Richard Warren, after being shot, came into Ike's restaurant, and the customers there reported asking, "Who shot you? Who shot you?"
I remember asking, where are you from? Where did this happen? And he said, the apartment number. And I said, do you know who did this to you? No, I do not. The guy had a mask on. He said he did not know who did it to him.
At that time, Richard Warren said, I don't know. The next morning, he reported that Marshall was screaming, "Kevin, what are you doing? Kevin, stop."
Marshall was saying, "What are you doing? We don't have anything. We don't have anything. Kevin, Kevin." And he kept on saying, "Don't say my name. Don't say my name."
So she called him by name, huh?
Yeah.
Kevin?
That sounds quite damning of Kevin Keith, but this honest, well-meaning eyewitness might in fact be making a mistake. Memory updates. Suggestions become part of your memory. That could very naturally happen as Richard Warren starts to understand more about what other people believe happened.
In fact, Richard Warren admitted on the stand he wasn't sure whether he or the police said Kevin's name first.
Did he remember that name Kevin because he heard it the night of the crime? Or did he remember the name Kevin because when he was recovering from surgery and heavily medicated, somebody put the name Kevin in front of him or somebody talked about Kevin in front of him?
Well, I've got some pictures here of some people, okay? I'm going to show them to you. There's 6 pictures. And we're going to see if you can pick him out.
The police told Warren to pick him out. The implication being, we have the guy, he's in the lineup, your job is to pick him. The picture of Kevin Keith is zoomed in more and difficult to make out the facial features. I've now shown this lineup to, I bet, 500 people, giving them the description that Richard Warren gave the police, which is big black man. And what should happen if this lineup was relatively fair is these people with no memory would distribute their responses across all the lineup members. Well over 75% of the people with no memory for the situation will pick number 5, Kevin Keith.
I think the police had already decided that Kevin Keith was the person that fit the description of who committed this crime, and they went to Richard Warren and had him confirm what they believed.
Rachel felt 7-year-old Juanita Reeves' identification of Kevin was equally problematic.
If you see him, you just point at him and tell me which one he is.
Hello.
You want to raise your hand?
She specifically said the shooter did not have a head that is shaped that way. One thing that is distinguishable about Kevin is he has a very pointy top to his head. It was so obvious. Apparently it was not to the jury.
She pointed at Kevin Keith but said, that's not him. That's not the man that shot me. Research shows that a non-identification is actually indicative of someone's innocence.
I spoke with Juanita. I went to her house to talk to her about the person who shot her, and she said that Kevin Keith is the person who shot me. And I was surprised. She wasn't trying to lie to me. She just genuinely had zero memory of the fact that she had excluded the picture of Kevin. I said, do you want me to send you a copy of your police interview? And she said yes. And so then I left and sent it to her, and I never bothered her again.
As Rachel dug deeper, she learned of someone else linked to the victims with a possible motive of his own.
It was like a house of cards. The second we started to find things, more and more information would come out. The case against Kevin just kind of crumbled.
As defense attorney Rachel Troutman looked deeper into Kevin Keith's case, she discovered that an unusual break had occurred during Kevin's original trial.
In the middle of the trial, the defense attorney brought to the attention of the court that he had been contacted by Rodney Melton's family members. They were nervous, they were scared, they believed Rodney Melton was the killer.
38-year-old Rodney Melton knew the victim's family and had an extensive criminal record, including killing a man when he was 17.
There was a discussion about the series of allegations that might have been attributed to Rodney Melton. The prosecutor said, maybe we should send the jury home. He was willing to look at this.
At that point, the discussion went off the record, and the judge resumed the trial.
That made me obviously want to look into him. I gathered some articles that were on Rodney Melton. I saw that around the same time that Kevin had been arrested for these murders, Rodney and his brother Bruce had been arrested for a string of pharmacy burglaries, and they were facing a 99-count indictment.
One article mentioned that the Rodney Melton investigation had been overseen by the Ohio State Board of Pharmacy. Rachel got a copy of their report.
I noticed that they had been watching Rodney Melton from the time before the murders in Bucyrus occurred all the way until after. The pharmacy board report alleged that the Meltons had, quote, spread the word that anyone who snitched on them would be killed.
The report said the snitch within Melton's pharmacy ring was Marshall's brother, Rudell Chapman, who also informed against Kevin Keith.
It was alleged that Rodney Melton told another confidential informant that he was paid $15,000 to cripple the man responsible for the drug raids. That statement was made 2 weeks before Riddell Chapman's family was shot.
Another possible link between Melton and the shootings was the getaway car.
So the night of the crime, there was an eyewitness to the getaway car. She witnessed the car hit a snowbank and described it as cream to light yellow.
State forensic scientist Michelle Yezzo had testified that the car's license plate left a 043 imprint in the snow, which she matched to a car linked to Kevin, despite the fact that Kevin's car was dark green.
We learned from the pharmacy board report that not only did Melton also have a car with a 043 in it, but that particular car was yellow. It felt like I had some very incriminating evidence in my hands against Rodney Melton.
Investigators dismissed Rodney Melton as a suspect, and he was never prosecuted or held responsible for the Chapman murders. As for the license plate, Rachel decided to put Yezzo's conclusion to the test.
We reached out to the retired FBI special agent, and I asked him if he could review Yezzo's conclusions. He found that the green car couldn't have left the 043 in the snow because of the way the bumper was shaped. He drafted his report, concluding that Michelle Yezzo was wrong.
By February 2010, Rachel Troutman had filed multiple appeals throughout the Ohio court system. She was denied all along the way.
The guard came to get me and said, "Keith, you got to call." And so he took me down the room and, took the cuffs off my wasted hands, and it was our attorney, Rachel. And she said, "Well, Kevin, I got to tell you, they set an execution date."
Kevin's execution was set for September 15th, 2010. In August, Rachel presented his case to the Ohio Parole Board for clemency.
We were very concerned because back then in Ohio, they were executing people once a month.
The evidence that shows Mr. Keith's innocence has never been heard by a court in its entirety.
The presentation was essentially the case against Rodney Melton. It was all of the evidence, and it was demonstrating that there had been a rush to judgment. We wanted to be able to say, no, actually look at it. Actually see what it is that the evidence shows. And you're not going to be able to let this man get executed.
While Richard Warren did not attend the hearing, Quentin and Juanita Reeves did, sharing their memories of that night.
It was a big ball of emotions. Basically, I cried the whole time. It was reliving the whole thing that happened again.
What do you think, we're lying? We're gonna switch our story, or there's nothing to switch up? That's what he's doing. There's new evidence every other day. Where?
Now it's time to see, is he gonna die for what he did?
8 days later, the parole board announced their decision, 8-0 against clemency.
And I had braced myself and I had braced Kevin for the fact that we were going to lose. But I knew, and Kevin knew, that it all came down to the governor.
The governor of Ohio had the power to uphold the parole board's decision or make his own. As Kevin waited, the state prepared for his execution.
They put everybody who had a date in one section. And so you had 9 cells up, 9 cells down. And the guy who had the next date, they put him in a different cell upstairs. They would let all of us out at the bottom at the same time, and we would talk to the guy that was up there. When it got to me, I had a guy, Mike. He was scheduled to be executed after me, so he helped me scrub the cell down and helped me take my stuff up there. Yeah. So.
I remember just how tired he was, dealing with each of the times that somebody said, "You were a killer." And he instructed me that I was not allowed to request a life sentence. I had to consider, am I ethically bound to do what's best for him, which would be to save his life? Or am I ethically bound to do what he's asking me to do? And I felt that it was up to him at that point. So I had to tell them, pardon him or kill him.
13 days before Kevin Keith's execution, his life was in the hands of Ohio Governor Ted Strickland.
I sat with my major legal advisor. We spent a lot of time on this particular case, thinking about it, talking about it, and re-looking at circumstances. We just felt like the execution could not proceed because it's final, and you can't correct mistakes once a life has been taken.
On September 2nd, 2010, the governor commuted Kevin's sentence to life without parole.
I didn't say he was innocent. No, because I didn't know that he was innocent. I was basing that on the fact that he had had a trial and, a jury of his peers. I made reference to the fact that there may be additional information come forth, and that would be a reason to relook at this.
I felt like when Rachel and them would go to the Clemency board, they would put everything forward that she had dug up, and it would be enough. When the governor made his decision, that was like, it really was a dagger. Life in prison, especially for something you couldn't do. That's a haunting thing.
But he should have got it. That's what he deserved. His family needs to feel the same way we do. Let them lose him. We lost ours at 4 and 6.
Almost lost ours, our own life.
And I tell you what, I'm glad he got a life sentence. I'm glad he didn't get to die. Because you know what? We don't get to die. We have to deal with it our whole life. We got a life sentence. That son of a bitch should too.
Now off of death row, Kevin no longer had a right to a court-appointed lawyer, nor a clear path to fight his life sentence.
Typically, when I would have a commutation, that ends the case. My office had to make the conscious decision that they weren't going to make me walk away. They let me keep fighting. I had a Google alert set up for some of the witnesses in the case, and I got a notice that there was an article about Michelle Yezo, the forensic analyst.
In 2016, the conviction of a man who'd spent 23 years in prison was overturned after Yezo's findings against him proved problematic.
So I immediately contacted those attorneys and obtained everything that they had gotten.
Yezo's personnel records revealed serious credibility issues dating back to before Kevin's trial.
There was a quote, "The consensus is that she would stretch the truth to satisfy the police department." This is an expert who came up with her results based on what they wanted her to. The BCI had written that her errors were going to lead to a miscarriage of justice, and they ultimately had her retired. Nobody ever told us about Yezo and the fact that she was known to lie for law enforcement. Nobody ever told Kevin's attorneys at the time of trial or in all the years since then. He could have been executed in 2010.
Based on this withheld information, Rachel argued that Kevin deserved a new trial. On October 26, 2018, the U.S. Sixth Circuit Court granted Kevin Keith a new look at his case.
They found that we couldn't have found this evidence earlier because it was hidden by the state. Finally, the courts were seeing what we saw.
That's what I've been looking for all these years. But at the same time, they knew all of that. They had all the evidence. I could have been dead.
I would think that any other lawyer would say this is his last chance, but this is a case where the wrong guy is in prison. I know that, and I'm not going to say anything's his last chance. The end of this case will be Kevin walking out the doors.
I just hope that eventually justice will be served. Justice is the right person being behind bars for that horrible crime.
All I know is what happened in that house. And I know he was there and he did it. I hope every person that thinks he's innocent feels bad. Very bad.
Kevin was 13 days from being killed by the state. I don't know how I would feel today if he had been executed on my watch, knowing what has come to light since. Given what we know about doubt in his guilt, if you had the power to turn him loose today, would you do it?